Good morning and welcome to the semi-final of the Public Sector Debate Competition. I'm Aniki Clark, Communication Lead in the TIU and your host for this match. I can tell the excitement in the room, so let's just do that one more time. Can you imagine that we're just one round away from the grand finale, from crowning the Public Sector Debate Competition champion? Indeed, today the top 4 teams will compete to secure their spots in the grand final. Our first match will see the National Irrigation Commission taking on the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining. Then we have the judiciary battling the Ministry of Tourism. Today promises to be very exciting, I'm sure, judging from what we're hearing just now. And so we'll get straight into it. Are you excited? Yes. Yes, I am too. But just a reminder for those of you online that if you missed any of the matches from previous rounds, you can always catch up on our YouTube page and Facebook as well. So for this match, as mentioned, we have the National Irrigation Commission proposing, and the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining opposing, and the moot is, be it resolved that Jamaica should substantially reduce its reliance on public-private partnerships in addressing the housing crisis. Let me read that again for you. Be it resolved that Jamaica should substantially reduce its reliance on public-private partnerships in addressing the housing crisis. I know we're all excited to get the match started, so I will first invite Team Proposition to introduce themselves.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Jamaica. I am Kamoy Kerr, and I'm the first proposition speaker.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Shania Gotcha James. I am the second speaker for the proposition.
Morning, everyone. Alex Murray, reply speaker for the proposition.
Thank you, Team Proposition. I will now invite Team Opposition to introduce themselves.
Terry Wright, first opposition speaker.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Andre Bogle. I am the second opposition speaker.
Good morning, everyone. Shalika Darby, third opposition speaker.
Thank you so much, Team Opposition. And have you noticed anything? What have you noticed? That they're all representing the Ministry of Agriculture, So win, lose, or draw, the ministry will win today, right? Whether it be an agency of the ministry or the parent ministry. That's a lovely thing. Let's cheer them on. So they are very familiar with each other, right? At this point, I will invite the judges from the Jamaican Association for Debating and Empowerment, JADE, to introduce themselves.
Good morning, Aniki Clark. Good morning, teams. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jermaine Barrett, and I have the privilege to serve as the chair adjudicator of this match.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Roshana Jarrett, and I'll be one of your wing adjudicators this morning.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Curtis Wallace, and I'm the other wing adjudicator.
Thank you so much, judges.
I'd say you forgot one important advice, Aniki. Strap on your seatbelts because it's going to be a bumpy ride. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to the semi-final match in the Public Sector Debate Competition for 2025. We have two very committed, very confident and sterling teams gathered here to contest this match. You'd have heard the moot before, and of course, by way of the rules, the first speaker will speak for 7 minutes, the second speaker 6 minutes, the third speaker 5 minutes. After the first two speakers, as first proposition, first opposition, we entered into the exciting period of cross-examination. We enter another period of cross-examination after the second pair of speakers. Note, debaters, you have what are called protected times. So the first minute and the last minutes are protected from points of information. You will be signaled as to when you have just elapsed your first minute and when you have commenced your last minute by the sound of a bell. And of course, when you have consumed the allotted time, you'll hear two dings of the bell. When you are out of time, so that's 15 seconds additional to the allotted time, you will hear continuous dinging of the bell, at which time we expect you to cease speaking, yield the lectern, and allow the debate to continue. Debaters, are you ready? Oh, no, you don't sound ready. Are you ready? Yes. Well, we are ready, and let's get the debate started. At this time, I call upon the Honorable First Proposition Speaker to open the debate. Hear.
Esteemed judges, members of the opposition, and my fellow audience, good day. Imagine a mother working 2 jobs, returning each night to a fragile shelter, flinching at every creak of the roof as the rain pours. Imagine a young graduate, bachelor's degree in hand, locked out of affordable housing as prices soar beyond reach. This is not fiction, Mr. Speaker. This is Jamaica today, caught in the grip of a deepening housing crisis, stagnant wages, skyrocketing housing prices, and for countless Jamaicans, the dream of home ownership is slipping further out of reach. It is against this background that we strongly stand to affirm the moot. Be it resolved that Jamaica should substantially reduce its reliance on public-private partnerships in addressing the housing crisis in Jamaica. But first, let me define public-private partnerships, otherwise called PPPs, as collaborations between government and private entities to deliver public services, including housing. However, when a fundamental right like housing is placed in the hands of a private, profit-driven entity, it's no longer a right. It becomes a commodity, and that is the heart of our problem. My team and I will show you that heavy reliance on PPPs undermines affordability, worsens inequality, and erodes the government's ability to deliver for its people. Our second speaker will explore the social impacts in greater depth, while our third speaker will close our case. Vision 2030 aims to ensure that all citizens have access to safe, sanitary, and affordable shelter by 2030. Jamaica's government, Mr. Speaker, must shift towards a mission-driven, equity-based housing strategy focused on affordability and accessibility. Over-reliance on PPPs, however, hands over this control to private developers focused solely on profit, not people. According to a 2023 NHT report, PPPs prices homes up to 30% higher than government-led alternatives, resulting in 55% of these homes remaining unaffordable, not accepted at this time, to low and middle-income Jamaicans. Consider the Caymanas Country Club, Mr. Speaker, a PPP housing project. A 2-bedroom unit costs over $33 million with a mortgage of $214,000 per month, more than triple the average Jamaican's entire salary, Mr. Speaker, and that's before accounting for groceries and even bills. How can low-income earners earning $70,000 per month, who pays government taxes for houses, afford to pay a $214,000 mortgage? That math is simply not mathing. Not accepted. Despite NHT now offering up loans up to $9 million, 2 persons put together still cannot afford this, Mr. Speaker. Picture Andre, a 28-year-old public sector worker earning $150,000 per month, Mr. Speaker. He walks by that same development each day, not just physically not accepted, not just physically, but emotionally walking away from a dream he knows he'll most likely never be able to afford. That is not development, Mr. Speaker, that's exclusion. Who exactly are we building for if the average Jamaican can't afford these homes? Reports show that 70 to 80% of PPP development undeveloped housing are bought by non-residents, driving average rents up to $100,000 and homes past 30 million and stemming to hundreds of millions, Mr. Speaker. Let us reduce PPP reliance and promote public-led housing and restore affordability. Affordable housing, Mr. Speaker, supports economic and social growth. Over-reliance on PPPs, however, dilutes the government's ability to shape national development. A 2024 Global Economic Study ranks Jamaica third in the world for brain drain. Our skilled doctors, nurses, teachers are leaving in droves. They're not just chasing higher pay, they're also escaping an unaffordable housing reality. A 2025 Gleaner article found that public investments in affordable housing generates more GDP growth than isolated private developments. Mr. Speaker, government-led initiatives such as transit-oriented housing in urban areas can be led by the government to deliver communal homes, affordable rental units, high-rise densities, Mr. Speaker, which can accommodate smart apartment solutions near jobs, transport hubs, and urban centers. This approach will retain our talent, boost our productivity, and strengthen our economy. The returns would be much larger than private unaffordable housing. The government must lead in setting the standard, ensuring equity for sustainable development. The opposition may also argue that the government is inefficient, but do not be misled, Mr. Speaker. History says otherwise. We have done it before, and we can do it again. In the 1970s and 2000s, agencies like NHT, UDC, and parish councils, Mr. Speaker, along with the Ministry of Housing and Agriculture, delivered over 10,000 homes per year, while regularizing tens of thousands of informal settlements during the time. Those were not luxury built. Those were affordable, accessible, and tailored for low-income Jamaicans, accounting for up to 80% of housing output during that time. Areas, Mr. Speaker, like Catherine Hall, Bushy Park, and Mount Salem are prime examples of this, where homes still exist today for as low as $7.8 million to date. With a manageable mortgage today, Mr. Speaker, at $40,000 per month, this model works, and Andre's dream can now be realized. Let us focus on a needs-based policy and substantially reduce public-private reliance. The opposition will also ask, Mr. Speaker, but the government can't afford this. Our answer is, yes, it can. Jamaica receives concessional housing from USAID, UK Aid, the IDB, Global Affairs Canada at low interest rate. The government also owns over 135,000 acres of land. We fund agriculture, security, healthcare, commercial center infrastructure development. So why not put more into public housing, Mr. Speaker? In 2019, the government earned over $160 billion in revenue the NHT earned over $160 billion in revenue according to their annual budget report. Yet $11 billion is diverted annually into non-housing priorities. Redirecting these funds, Mr. Speaker, and aligning them could unlock $115 billion per year in housing value according to a 2025 Gleaner report. Let us reduce privatizing, Mr. Speaker, and prioritize our housing response. The opposition might say they're building homes, but they're building walls between the haves and the haves not. If we care about equity, dignity, and Jamaica's future, we must substantially reduce our reliance on PPPs and return to public-led solutions that put people before profit. At the end of the day, housing is not about shelter, it's about justice, opportunity, and nation building. Thank you.
Indeed. We thank the first proposition speaker coming to you there from Team National Irrigation Commission. At this time, we welcome the first opposition speaker from the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries, and Mining. Let's make that speaker welcome.
So, Mr. Speaker, the first speaker of team proposition has already failed to lay to you a strong foundation and credibly demonstrate to the reasonable man why the government should substantially reduce its reliance on PPPs, which, Mr. Speaker, currently function as a critical implement in alleviating the current housing crisis. In fact, for the reasonable man, the only circumstance under which a substantial reduction in reliance on PPPs could help address the housing crisis is if such a reliance is shown to be inherently harmful, detrimental, or a root cause of the crisis itself. That has not been proven. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, I would like to expound on the definition of PPPs to highlight that each party contributes expertise in the design, financing, building, and operation of infrastructure or services with shared risk, rewards, and resources, Mr. Speaker. The World Bank calls PPPs a tool for governments and to use private sector skills and capital to speed up the delivery of infrastructure and services. What the proposition asks of us is that the government of Jamaica should significantly reduce partnerships with the private sector relationship, Mr. Speaker, which currently accelerate financing, development, and delivery in order to resolve the very crisis those partnerships are helping to address. This is absolutely illogical. However, Mr. Speaker, as proponents of reason, truth, and data-driven decision-making, I will outline why the reliance on PPPs are necessary in the context of a state like Jamaica and demonstrate that PPPs are not harmful to the government, but instead serve as an invaluable and indispensable tool in addressing the housing crisis. Our second speaker will present arguments highlighting how the advantages of using PPPs outweigh the disadvantages, showing how we can leverage the strengths of the PVPs, of the private sector, and how that will further address the issues that we're facing. Our reply speaker will put to bed the notion that significantly reducing the government's reliance on PPPs will have a net positive effect in alleviating the housing crisis. Now, the truth, Mr. Speaker, despite many positive trends in the Jamaican economy, we remain a developing country, facing demanding debt repayment obligations, inflation, a sliding dollar, while desperately seeking to deliver key social services to our people. Fitch Solutions even project that the Jamaican dollar would weaken to 164 per USD by the end of 2025. In this environment, a responsible government acknowledges that it lacks the capacity and that it would be irresponsible to fund large-scale housing projects independently.
Point of
this
information.
Cannot be done without trade-offs that would further hurt the economy.
Point
and
of
the
information.
People. I'll take you in a minute. In fact, Mr. Speaker, it is because the government acknowledges this responsibility why we are having this conversation in the first place. I'll take you. Okay, yeah. Mr. Speaker, developing housing is very costly to undertake due to a multiplicity of factors such as rising construction costs and can come with varying degrees of risk. Therefore, if we were to diminish the private involvement, Mr. Speaker, we would be creating a gap in the source of funding that would need to be filled. To substantially reduce, we would have to substantially replace. The challenge that the proposition will try to avoid in this debate is that where is the money? The money within the national budget, or from which of the other sectors should this money be diverted? Is it from the budget for health, education, and support for food security? The sad part is that the government would not be able to sufficiently fill this gap, even if they tried, due to its limited fiscal capacity. Mr. Speaker, even the Prime Minister, Dr. the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, acknowledged this fact when he outlined that Jamaica's housing needs far exceed 70,000 units. He said, and I quote, "To undertake such a massive housing building program, the government can't do it alone. The government needs the private sector to come on board," end quote. Hence, Mr. Speaker, in the context of weaker governments who are already struggling, it is more logically sound that they partner with the private sector entities so as to cushion the financial blow. The private sector will provide the financial relief in the form of capital and offload the weight of fiscal risk that an already well-encumbered government would no longer need to carry. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, if we should reduce our reliance on PPPs, it will be applying more pressure on taxpayers. Mr. Speaker, the money that the government will use to supply the housing solutions on its own will be funded by me and you through taxes. Increased spending will mean increased taxation and or borrowing, which is something that the common man will feel as he will have to repay. For example, Mr. Speaker, the private sector can assume total financing of a $15 billion housing project. That is $15 billion that the government would have invested elsewhere. However, in taking the lead, that $15 billion is now being used to divert to address the housing solution. Whether or not the proposition can face this challenge, Mr. Speaker, the government in trying to meet the critical demand would need to redirect funds from other critical areas. So imagine, we are already struggling to support our healthcare and educational sectors with proper resources and infrastructure. Imagine creating a world where funding towards national security, irrigation, Mr. Speaker, food security, and debt repayment would now have to be cut in order to satisfy the capital requirement for housing. Things on our own. Why do things on our own and throw away the hammer to press the nails with our thumbs? Moving on, Mr. Speaker. But we are not speaking from a place of feeling or opinion, Mr. Speaker. Public-private partnerships are statistically and historically proven tools used to catalyze infrastructure development in developing countries like Jamaica and are leveraged to address crises in developing countries, Mr. Speaker. The problem is, however, Jamaica has not kept pace with its infrastructure needs, and the proposition is intent on us lagging further behind. The issue in itself is not necessarily reliance, but more so improper regulation of PPPs, Mr. Speaker. So what the government has recognized is that the partnership with the private sector should be regulated to optimize transparency, accountability, efficiency, and performance, Mr. Speaker. In leveraging PPPs, we regulate, we do not retreat. Right, Mr. Speaker? So instead of a substantial reduction of partnerships with proven contributors to housing, ladies and gentlemen, the crisis will not be solved by getting rid of our tools. It will be solved by using them effectively.
Thank you.
The opposition part.
We thank the first opposition speaker coming to you there from the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining. Ladies and gentlemen, we now enter the first segment of cross-examination. In this segment, the opposition team gets a chance to ask 3 questions of the proposition team. Each question limited to 10 seconds, each response limited to 30 seconds. Let us begin. At this time, we welcome the questions from the opposition team.
All right, so PPPs are designed to transfer significant financial, construction, and operational risk from the public sector to the private sector. How does the Moot propose the government effectively manage it and mitigate these risks?
All right, so as it relates to those risks, the government would have already, through various programs led by the NHT and HAJ, to deliver housing solutions for Jamaicans. So what we are debating is not something new as it relates to transfer of risk. But what we're saying is that the government have already, as my first speaker would have demonstrated, from as early as the 90s and the 70s, would have produced those homes without the use of PPPs. Sorry.
All right, thank you. How would you then propose that significantly reducing reliance on these public-private partnerships would help in solving the housing crisis?
So my dear second speaker, just remember that the current system that is being used is the reliance on PPP. Hence, we are in the housing crisis, and that is what this Moot is based about. Thank you.
For clarity, your first speaker would have suggested that PPPs are the cause of the housing crisis. And quite frankly, you have not been able to prove this.
Is there a question there?
Right. How is it possible, and how are you able to show that the PPPs are actually causing the problem?
Very good question, third speaker. And that is why our second speaker will now come to the fore and show you our proposal. So you'll see that in a few.
All right, thank you very much for that exchange of questions and answers. We continue with another set of questions and responses. The questions now coming from the National Irrigation Commission team. Proposition, you may proceed.
If PPPs are meant to increase housing supply, why are the majority of their developments still unaffordable to low and middle-income Jamaicans?
I would challenge your definition of affordable. In the previous debate that the Prime Minister would have given, he set a cap on the PPP contracts of $14 million or less. Not to mention, there are many other PPP arrangements that allow for low and middle income persons to access houses. PPPs is the partnership between private and public. That doesn't mean that it has to be unchecked through the private sector making profit as their primary motive. In fact, it is PPP that constricts these big developments from happening and allows,
Just for the same point that was made regarding the Prime Minister, in that same post, the Prime Minister indicated that he is instructing the NHT and the HAJ to provide 70,000 houses. How would you now say that the government cannot afford these solutions?
Your understanding of how public-private partnerships clearly work are flawed. From your first speaker's indication that public-private partnerships really are just privatization, which again is a flawed reasoning. The HAJ and the Housing Association of Jamaica will utilize several different types of public-private partnerships to implement and to achieve their goals. And that is a fundamental point, is that government by themselves can't do it alone. And don't forget that PPPs translate beyond just providing the house, but even providing the inputs, providing the labor, etc. It's our partnerships with the private sector across the entire chain of building the house that makes the system work.
Thank you.
So if those same inputs and all the other things that you'd have mentioned, third speaker, why is it that at least 80% of PPPs are now bought by foreign investors for the Airbnb versus locals who need them?
My two responses to that. First, I challenge the source of that data. Secondly, this comes to what our alternate approach is. PPPs are a tool that we're going to use to solve the housing crisis. We can get the houses built faster, better quality. No, we need to refine our use of the tool and not reduce our use of the tool entirely. What I am saying is this. The government, through our 2023 housing policy, is putting in place the right backstops in the contracts that we take with these private sector companies.
Thank you. Oh, burning desire to wrap that up, eh? Alas, we're constrained by time. All right, ladies and gentlemen, quite an exciting round of questions and answers. I think it deserves at least a round of applause. Continuing now, we make welcome at this time the second speaker from Team National Irrigation Commission Proposition. Hear, hear.
Honorable judges, esteemed colleagues, members of the opposition, good day. I stand today not only to extend the arguments advanced by my lovely colleague, but also to resolutely reinforce the proposition stance that a government-led housing strategy, not one dominated by PPPs, offers the most equitable, accountable, and sustainable path for addressing Jamaica's housing crisis. Now, let me state our stance clearly. This is not about the government acting alone. The government must lead housing as it is its constitutional duty. Let the PPP support, not dominate. Allow me to examine the core claims that will be purported by the opposition and has already been purported by them and refute them with evidence-based clarity. Opposition claim number one, PPPs are efficient and necessary. The opposition asserts that PPPs are synonymous with efficiency. However, efficiency for whom exactly? The Auditor General 2024 report revealed that more than 70% of PPP housing developments between 2015 and 2022 targeted middle and upper income earners. In contrast, initiatives aimed at low income housing were disproportionately delayed, underfunded, or cancelled outright. The Planning Institute of Jamaica reports that over 700,000 Jamaicans, approximately 1/3 of the population, live in substandard housing condition. The efficiency touted by PPPs exclude the most vulnerable members of our society. Opposition claim number 2, PPPs guarantee transparency and accountability. If PPPs ensure transparency, why did Transparency International assign Jamaica PPP's housing sector score a 5.2 out of 10 in its 2023 Corruption Perception Index? Moreover, the Auditor General has documented over $9 billion in losses due to contractual mismanagement, cost overruns, and inadequate oversight since 2015. In contrast, government-led agencies like the NHD undergo statutory audits, parliamentary reviews, and maintain a higher degree of public accountability. Opposition claim number 3, the government cannot lead housing independently. We firmly disagree, and so do the data.
Point of information.
Under the National Housing Trust Amendment Act 2020, each year, $11.4 billion is diverted for other uses, a measure active through 2026. March 2026. Further, according to a Gleaner article dated November 8, 2024, the NHT accumulated over $164 billion in surplus as of March 2023 and generated $18 billion during the 2022-2023 fiscal year. Additionally, it maintains a land bank valued at $6.5 billion. This is untapped potential funds and assets that, if redirected, could support thousands of affordable homes and essential infrastructure. Just look at successful government-led housing programs which has benefited thousands of Jamaicans. Portmore Land Development in 1967 to 1975, the Greater Portmore Housing Development 1990 to 1999, and the new Social Housing Program 2021 to present, just to name a few. It was done before, and it surely can be done again. While the opposition may say that PPP should be regulated, regulation cannot override a profit-first logic. Housing built to maximize return will never prioritize the masses. Now let us transition to the solution. We, the proposition, propose a comprehensive national housing strategy led by the state with targeted intervention across 3 segments. Segment number 1, demographic intervention, students, affordable rental dormitories near tertiary institutions, young professionals, affordable rent-to-own residential schemes near job centers supported by improved rural-urban transit, public sector workers, reserve housing near administrative hubs, taxpayer ages 30 and over, housing subsidies partially funded from their NHD contribution that covers a percentage of housing deposit mortgage each year up to a limit. Land and infrastructure reform, Crown lands. The government controls approximately 135,000 acres. Allocate these for structured, affordable, and community monitored developments. Accelerated formalization. Upgrade informal settlements into legal planned communities. Institutional realignment. NHD, UDC, and HAJ reforms. Shift focus from the profit or refund to development impact and direct housing subsidy, the Housing Resilience Fund for emergency shelters, rent support, and climate-proof housing, regional financing, engage CARICOM, the IDB, and international partners for sustainable housing investment. Now let us put a face to the plight of many. Consider Pamela, a single mother of 2 in Pigpen Gardens, who applied for a home through PPP initiative 7 years ago. To this day, she waits. This is the norm for PPPs like Elsha View Housing Project, where people have been waiting from 2022 and still don't have a house to call a home. She lives under a leaking roof, working multiple jobs, saving what she can, yet she remains shut out of the system, not for a lack of effort, but for a lack of access. Pamela is not an outlier. She's evidence of a systemic failure. A government-led strategy is not merely socially adept. It is a catalyst for economic growth. It stimulates construction, prefabricated housing, and building materials industry, creates jobs in STEM, engineering, urban planning, and infrastructure for local talents, encourage innovation in green and climate-resilient housing. In conclusion, the opposition would want us to accept a model that elevates private interests and relegate public responsibility. We reiterate our position. The government must lead Jamaica housing solution with minimal reliance on PPPs. Thank you.
We are indeed thankful for the presentation just heard coming to us from the second proposition speaker. We now make welcome the second opposition speaker to do likewise. Hear, hear.
I realize. All right. Ready to go? All right. Ladies and gentlemen, judges, and members of the proposition, and my team members, good morning. I do have a prepared speech, but I'm realizing that I would be replying to an accurate understanding of what PPPs are, and I don't think proposition has that. So instead, I'm going to make something explicitly and incredibly clear. When we say PPP, we mean public government, private partnership. And what I think proposition is disagreeing with is a privatization model where all of our homes are developed by private entities that are exclusively looking to achieve profit, not the mechanism that we have currently, where there are actually 2 PPP units as per our current housing policy, one house at the Ministry of Finance that does the final check and balance, after the other one housed at the DBJ receives the business case and decides whether or not this particular developmental proposal from the private entity will act in the best interest of Jamaican people. Okay. I have so many things that I need to speak about. We mentioned that the government can afford to produce all of the houses because we're getting funding from USAID concession, USDA aid that Donald Trump just shut down. So we are supposed to rely upon loans from overseas in order to build our houses when we already have the appropriate tools that benefit us in so many ways. Mr. Speaker, let me get into my speech. PPPs are a proven methodology for addressing the 2 core issues of housing availability: the scale at which the government can produce housing, which is the availability, and the cost or availability of financing for the government to invest in large-scale homes. While the proposition proposes that we do have all the funding is there and it's ready to go, the fact of the matter is we have been depending on our private relationships to build the houses because we cannot meet the capacity that we need in order to get there. The government established in 1994 the Joint Venture Program, the forerunner, which is the Housing Public-Private Partnership Program, to facilitate developments of land by private developers. The government, particularly the Ministry of Housing, provided site and local expertise, not at this time, while private developers provided technology and identified local and foreign investment capital. That's how public-private partnerships work. The government provides the resources, the government provides the regulatory constraints to ensure that what these private entities do falls in line with what the public needs. Currently, if we are going to meet the government of Jamaica's, what is it again? 70,000 home target. That is the figure, that is the amount of homes we are going to need in order to fully address the housing crisis. If we're going to get there, we need to go at a rate of 15,000 homes per year, thereabout. Currently, through government-only mechanisms, we would get to about 1,000 at a time, but through PPPs, we are at 9,000 houses at a time. So what we really should be doing, instead of decreasing our reliance on PPPs, which is our avenue for increasing the housing supply quickly and with the appropriate quality, what we should be doing is increasing
Point of information.
Our reliance. Go ahead.
Point of information. You have mentioned that we should be doing this, but how does it afford for the housing crisis when it's still unaffordable to most Jamaicans? That is the housing crisis at hand.
I'm so glad you brought up that question, and my first speaker touched on that. The truth of the matter, Mr. Speaker, is that the housing crisis is not caused by public-private partnerships. The housing crisis is caused by global instability that have led to prices being so incredibly expensive. It has led to our developmental model that depends upon urbanization for our primary development. We don't have factories in Manchester. We don't have processing plants in St. Anne. So everybody has to come to Kingston. So when everybody has to come to Kingston, guess what happens? The housing demand is going to be extremely high. I'm an economist. The best way for you to reduce demand is by increasing supply enough to match it. And that's where you get equilibrium prices where we can afford the houses. This is a demand and supply issue. We cannot reduce our greatest tool for increasing supply and expect that it's going to solve the issue. The issue is not relying on PPPs. I can grant you then, the issue is that the government should use and wield the tool of PPPs more intelligently. And you know what? To be fair to our government and to our Prime Minister, he has been doing that. If you read the 2023 housing policy, you will see all of the information from 2009, what is the amount of houses that we have and what's the amount of houses that we will need, versus 2017. And when you take a look at it, you realize that the approach that we're going to take is to strategically guide our public-private partners to fulfill that gap. I'm sorry, I'm on a roll. Let me continue. The dichotomy, there's a dichotomy that is created that exists outside of using public-private partnerships. Either you are going to increase the dominance of private-private partnerships where, remember, we don't want the government and the private sector to work together. So what's going to happen is the private is going to have to come in and fill that demand, or the government themselves is going to have to come in and fill that demand. Now, we love our government, we love our country, but oh my gosh, do we really believe that they can fully fulfill the demand for 70,000 homes without relying on any developers that have the appropriate skills, expertise in the time that we will need to do it? I am so sorry, proposition. You have not made the case that public-private partnerships are the problem. You've not made the case that by reducing our demand on them, our reliance on them, we will address the housing crisis. We cannot reduce public-private partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you for that fine speech. And ladies and gentlemen, the arguments. Thank you very much. I do understand that you're excited. You're really locked into the debate. But let us continue now with the second segment of cross-examination. The rules remain the same as obtained in the first segment. So let us carry on with the questions coming now from the opposition team.
Team proposition, are you aware that the problem of affordability that you speak so much of is actually extended outside of PPPs?
Could you repeat?
The problem of affordability, do you know that the problem of affordability that you speak so much of extends outside of PPPs?
That cannot be the case, because in your model and in your world, you devolve the role of the government to PPPs to provide housing. What we're seeing currently is that the houses, when provided, Andre, Pamela cannot afford those same houses. So what we're arguing about is affordability and accessibility.
My name is Andre. Are you saying, and it really is, are you saying that the only way I'll be able to afford a home is if we do not use our most vital tool and most useful tool in addressing housing supply?
Mr. Andre, since you have acknowledged yourself, what we're saying is that currently Jamaica is in a housing crisis. The current model that's been dominated by PPP is not providing the solution. That is why our second speaker would have laid a substantial amount of proposals that can be used to address the housing crisis that we're currently facing.
Can you demonstrate for me how it is that PPPs are the cause of urbanization, the cause of supply and demand shortages in terms of houses, how they are the cause of all of the issues that the cost for input and all the issues that underpin the problem.
Thank you.
So, Andre, the economist, I am a realist. So what I'm saying, what I'm saying is that the debate was not constructed on all of the implements that cause urbanization and all of that. The debate asks us, should the government stop its reliance on PPP? And we have clearly demonstrated why and how and propose plausible solutions. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for this phase of cross-examination. We carry on now with the questions coming from the National Irrigation Commission team proposition. You may proceed.
Your second speaker mentioned DBJ, but the same DBJ in a 2023 report flagged poor oversight and poor construction as a major issue. Can you point to a PPP project in Jamaica where the average Jamaican earning 150, for example, could afford this?
Thank you.
Could afford this?
Mr. Speaker, the opposition is trying to trick the House to believe that the proposition is trying to trick the House to believe that the issues of affordability is directly linked to PPPs. People can't even afford to eat food, much less buy a house. It is deeper than PPPs.
And the PPPs are the solution to the housing crisis.
For who?
No, I want to ask.
Is that your question?
So just to clarify, so the second speaker would have mentioned that the government plans to propose 1,000 houses. But we have here in the same mood that the government indicated through the NHC to provide 19,500 houses. Can you just clarify for us, please?
Yes, I'm dying to, because how they're going to build those houses for the NHT and you're going to check back your source and you're going to see it after the match. You know how they're going to do it? Through public-private partnerships. Because that is how you get it done. You're thinking of public-private partnerships as though we just give a developer and say, develop some home however you want to develop it. But that's not what it is. It is the government deciding on a strategic housing plan and then using private entities as the tool to build them. One more question.
Final question. How do you account for government-led initiatives in the past, in the 70s, as I mentioned, that delivered over 10,000 homes per year without PPP's involvement, and as well as regularizing over 60,000 informal settlements?
I am so ready for it. I wish I had got your name. I'm also a realist. Look at the economic conditions in the 1970s versus 2025, and you will understand why the government in 2025 has to benefit from the tool of public-private partnerships to build the houses. Back in the 70s, the government might have had the capacity to get it done. Although when I look at some of these houses that you're espousing, I am not so sure, because nobody would want to live in some of these tiny matchback houses that they're presenting.
Thank you.
We should have more time. We should have more time.
Tiny
This is indeed a spirited match. And I'm happy that we can take a 1-minute pause now, gather ourselves, compose ourselves ahead of the reply speeches. So your 1-minute pause begins now, teams. All right, ladies and gentlemen, the bell signals the end of the pause. We are now so ready to resume this debate. At this time, ladies and gentlemen, we call upon the reply speaker from the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining, Team Opposition, to present their final submission.
Mr. Speaker, honorable hosts, the arguments put forward by the three speakers from Team Proposition are a perfect example how not to build a house. Weak foundation in their poor characterization and understanding of what PPPs are and how they truly should function. Untrained contractors who throw away unneeded tools, just because they feel like they don't like them. And a miscalculating program manager who fails to count the cost before they start. They have failed to present to you the true upfront costs, and they have failed to uphold their own burden to demonstrate that PPPs are really the problem of this drastic crisis, which would substantiate or validate their recommendation for substantial reduction in partnership and reliance. Their bad foundation, ruthless argument could never face Gilbert or the big bad wolf. And quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, they could not even face the reasonable man who they are trying to convince. Mr. Speaker, their argument is flawed and it's built on one very poor foundation. They claim that the affordability issue is being caused or is a problem of PPPs. Mr. Speaker, let me take my time. Even if government were to build the houses, they would still be very much unaffordable. Even if you are trying to build a matches box room on the land that your grandmother left for you, it would still be very much expensive. Why is that? Because the housing crisis, which they have failed to characterize, transcends PPPs. If you are to build that one room, if you are to get the imported materials, if you are to source the labor, if you are to get the lumber, the concrete, all of the different inputs to build that house, and many of you in this room and even online have tried, it is very expensive, and that crisis is independent of PPPs. Quite frankly, I want to even thank my second speaker for going over the economic considerations, because there are supply and demand considerations that deeply underlie the crisis. You have higher demand than you have supply. So if government were to take it upon themselves again to undertake the risks, to undertake the financial burden, and to build out these houses, where would they be sourcing the inputs? The same place you're trying to source it from to build the one bedroom. Where would they be getting the labor? Where would they be getting the relevant implements to actually get the project started and completed? We would be in a direct and in the same position that we are today. The inputs, the implements, the support that we need to build a single house are magnified on the scale that PPPs are now facing, and their cost risk is also being absorbed by the independent or the individual man. Essentially, Mr. Speaker, what I'm saying is the crisis that the proposition has failed to characterize is not solved by the removal of the partners that are able to drive the supply curve that reduces the cost of a single house. Mr. Speaker, furthermore, I want to indicate that the proposition has a very much erroneous understanding of what PPPs are. Throughout their entire speech, I had to be cringing. There are several examples that they raised of private or public incentives or public undertakings that were really public-private partnerships. Many of their examples that they raised across the country were actually built by public-private partnerships with New Era and with Gore Homes. They were even talking about how the government should be taking on and how the government will be taking on additional responsibilities with NHT and with the HAJ. And again, it points to the understanding that they are unclear of exactly how public-private partnerships function in government. Government as the first P. Private sector providing the capital, the initiative and the support, the technical resources, the expertise as the second P, and the third P being a partnership between both entities. They have suggested to this honorable house that public-private partnerships in all of their examples, and of course the second speaker being the worst, she would have pointed to public-private partnerships really being a factor of privatization. And again, these are erroneous understandings of what really characterizes the modern public-private partnership. Mr. Speaker, I want to condense a view to you. There are several options available to any country in the suite of public-private partnerships. Jamaica currently has a build and operate model.
But public-private partners can be brought in to solve the crisis by providing additional access to financing. Public-private partnerships can be brought in to alleviate the crisis that is being experienced in trying to find contracted labor. Public-private partnerships can be brought in to solve several other of the cost and underlying issues that are riddling the current system. And the crisis can be solved by strengthening and broadening our utilization of tools available to us under public-private partnerships than reducing our reliance and reducing our access to the capital, innovation, expertise, and incentives afforded to us as a developing country by leveraging our private partners. Let me simply condense the point here. Data has shown us public-private partnerships achieve an increase in supply of housing internationally at a 30% faster rate on average than government-built projects alone. And quite frankly, the proposition has not given us a credible outcome as the alternative to this. Thank you very much.
Thank you for concluding the case from the vantage point of Team Opposition, the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining. Ladies and gentlemen, we conclude our debate now with the final presentation coming to us from the proposition team, Team National Irrigation Commission. Let's make that speaker welcome.
Good morning, everyone. I also have a prepared speech, but let me just clarify an erroneous claim by the opposition. So they have indicated that Jamaica is unable to provide at least 70,000 houses as related to the housing policy. But I have right here an excerpt from the Prime Minister to say that Jamaica is on track to deliver a national commitment to construct 70,000 new houses. That is not true, Gore. That is not true, other part. That is 43,000 is to be constructed by the NHT, of which 40,000 have already commenced construction, and another 14,000 by the HAJ. Thank you. So having assessed the current housing situation, it is evident that Jamaica is facing a substantial housing crisis, to which the opposition has failed to understand. This prompts a crucial question. Who should spearhead the effort to tackle the pressing need for affordable housing for our citizens, as the current approach, and this Moot has indicated, relies heavily on the private sector to do so and raises a serious concern about whether profit-driven entities can truly prioritize the needs of our citizens over their financial interests. My first two speakers, judges, have demonstrated that Jamaica should significantly reduce its dependence on public-private partnerships in solving the housing crisis. However, before I remind the judges why, I'll revisit some of the claims made by our opponents that are rather erroneous. The opposition would have us believe that PPPs are more efficient and reduce the burden on the government to provide funding. However, we highlight that efficiency without accessibility is a failed policy. In this regard, providing affordable and accessible housing will not be achieved for Andre, Pamela, Shalika, or the average Jamaican. Judges, we, the proposition, simply cannot agree with that motion put forward by the opposition. Finally, they suggested that PPPs reduce the burden on the state. But isn't that exactly the problem in moments of crisis that we are currently facing? The government should not be stepping aside. It should be stepping up. The government is mandated, let me repeat, the government is mandated to provide for its people. Therefore, it is only sensible to the government to lead the solution to the housing crisis. Judges, the claims made by our opponents, if followed, would only serve to exacerbate the very housing crisis that continues to plague thousands of Jamaicans who are not asking for luxury, but simply dreaming of dignity and stability that comes with home ownership. When housing is driven by profit, low and middle income earners are priced out. When developers are left unchecked, unregulated, entire communities are displaced. When we rely too heavily on PPPs, we allow the market to dictate who deserves dignity, and that is not the Jamaica we want to build. Judges, let me remind you of the solution proposed by the second speaker, which include reducing reliance on PPP. So these include creation of affordable rental facilities near universities, invest in rent-to-own programs for young professionals, expand social housing programs and rural schemes, and also formalize informal settlements through the land settlement program. And lastly, redirect public land, a total of 135 acres, and funding to projects that serve the people, not investor. This is not a theory, judges. It has been done before. Government-led initiatives like Longville Park and Catherine Hall have proven this approach work. Now, I'll revisit some of the main arguments by our first speaker, that the government exists to serve people and not profit. It is fundamental to the truth that the government are elected to protect the public good, especially during crisis. When housing becomes a national emergency, it is the government's responsibility to step forward, not step back, and outsource the job. Consider this, the National Housing Trust faces a backlog of more than 100,000 units, and who are the majority of people in need? Low-income and vulnerable citizens are the least attractive to the very PPP developers that our opposition would have made mention. Opposition, we cannot trust profit-seeking companies to prioritize the needs of the poor when the bottom line depends on selling homes at high prices. Reducing our reliance on PPPs does not mean shutting the door on all partnerships that they would have mentioned. It means the government must take back the lead in the housing development. We have already seen it work. The Build on Your Own Land program from the NHC enables Jamaicans to receive financing to construct their home. This government-led initiative empowers citizens, eliminates the profit motive, and ensures that home ownership is a dream that can be realized. And when paired with our suggestive drive to formalize informal housing settlements, this results in even more persons attaining ownership under safe and dignified conditions. In conclusion, this debate is not about opposing growth. It's about reclaiming responsibility. Public-private partnerships may sound promising, but in practice, they often deliver exclusive, overpriced developments and an erosion of the government's control. So I leave you with this final question, judges. Should the human right to shelter be determined by the private developer's profit margin? We oppose the current approach that the claims made by the opposition, and that is why we strongly support the motion that Jamaica should significantly reduce its reliance on public-private partnerships in solving the housing crisis, and we ask that serious consideration be given to proposals presented. Thank you.
Thank you to our great debaters for a fine contest. Ladies and gentlemen, as we gear up to leave and deliberate, we want to just turn over, first of all, to Aniki so she can properly take us to that point.
Thank you, Jermaine. Let's clap the teams once more. Certainly, it was a fine debate worthy of a semi-final match. But sadly, one team will make it to the final, and the other will play for the third place position. So, whether you go forward or not to the final, there you go, one agriculture. But just to remind our audience who may have got lost in the conversation, the debate, we had the National Irrigation Commission and the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining debating the moot. Be it resolved that Jamaica should substantially reduce its reliance on public-private partnerships in addressing the housing crisis. The teams did well. It is now up to the judges to deliberate and determine the winner of this match and who will advance to the grand finale. For those of you online, grab a cup of coffee or grab something to cool you down and come back in a few minutes when the judges will announce the winner and the other prizes, or the best speaker prize. Stay tuned, and for those of you in the room, you may go across to the cafeteria to refresh yourselves.
models for resolving Jamaica's housing crisis. That was what this debate really centered on. And the specific model under interrogation is that of PPPs, public-private partnerships. Ladies and gentlemen, what a debate this was. It was absolutely thrilling. Another round of applause indeed is deserved. So to remind you, the teams that contested the motion, the Moot rather, from the National Irrigation Commission on team proposition, and of course, another team, another very strong team within the very same parent ministry, the parent ministry themselves, the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries, and Mining. Ladies and gentlemen, the first issue that the proposition team raises as to their concerns with PPPs is a matter of costs. They say to us that low-income earners are not able to have their most fundamental or an important human need met because it is far too costly. It is above their capacity to actually satisfy that demand. They say that housing is being provided, but it is being provided and afforded to by those who can actually afford it, those who are middle class and upper income earners. That, they say, points to an inequitous kind of arrangement that they contend is best solved through the government lessening its reliance on PPPs and relying more on its own capacity to resolve the issue. Now, at that point in the debate, we're thinking, well, how is it that the government, or what proof do you have, team proposition, that the government does have latent capacity to resolve the massive deficits that exist within the housing sector? And they say to us, they give us two fundamental points. They say to us that the government has done it in the past, and they point to housing schemes and housing solutions that were government implemented, government designed, government established, that were in their world at a lower price point, affordable for the average house seeker. And they say to us as well that, quite frankly, nowadays, the NHT, the government's major sort of mortgage guarantee or offerer, is very liquid, to the tune of over $100 billion. And they say that, furthermore, the government is effectively taking 11-point-odd billion dollars of this excess revenue for budgetary support, which they contend could be reallocated to solving the needs of the housing crisis, the need for which the monies were already established within the housing trust. Now, one of the concerns that we have from the outset is, even though this is a model, we don't know the extent to which these sums of money would be adequate in solving the major concern that exists, that of the housing shortage. And so what we wanted to hear a little bit more is a bit of a quantification of what that spend would achieve in resolving the 70,000 house deficit that exists in Jamaica right now. That, ladies and gentlemen, takes us now to the opposition's case. The opposition contends that with the public-private partnership arrangement, we benefit from better efficiencies, better transparency, and the government is able to attend to the challenge that persists to a greater extent. It can produce more houses, and the government, importantly in the world of team opposition, can use its regulatory capacity to really ensure that housing solutions are provided to people to the best extent and the best quality possible. Now, here's a concern that arises again by the time the debate switches to proposition's team. Proposition tells us that a number of the claims raised by team opposition are actually untrue. And I really want to commend specifically the second proposition speaker. She says the transparency issue, not so transparent, according to Transparency International and that very low ranking of 5 or thereabout with respect to Jamaica's housing ranking and the conditions thereof. The point to questions surrounding efficiency. Is the private sector more efficient and more competent at delivering housing? Again, they provide argumentation to disprove, or attempt at least to disprove this. Here again, we come upon another challenge for us as adjudicators. We're wondering, even if it is that the characterization of the private sector and its engagement with the public sector in that partnership is as problematic as is highlighted and articulated by Team Opposition. We don't know whether or not the government sector does not also have many of these challenges. We're wondering whether or not a world where the government takes on the full swath of providing housing solutions, whether or not we won't find significant concerns existing just the same. I think to kind of preemptively kind of engage with that concern, they point to the fact that the public sector has, for example, benefits from it being audited by the Auditor General and so forth, and those mechanisms provide some amount of solvency. But again, we don't know the extent to which these problems will not persist, in as much as in the world as it is right now, those mechanisms don't remove entirely concerns surrounding inefficiency and malpractice, malfeasance in government as well. Furthermore, the characterization of Team Opposition, which is to say, well, there's greater efficiency and greater capacity within the private sector, and then the government can use its regulatory capacity to funnel the private sector into constructing houses at the lowest, most reasonable price point possible, with as well the benefits of all the other arrangements that the government would wish to regulate for, that those can be had because the government can tap into the capacity of the private sector to generate the kinds of housing solutions at the rate at which it needs to create. Capacities that don't exist as much in the government sector. Again, we hear the $100 billion. We don't know in the grand scheme of things how it is or the extent to which that provides sufficient solvency. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there's a major concern that was highlighted in the second opposition's presentation. He says, at that point in the debate, we need to re-examine what is meant by public-private partnerships. And he says to us that a public-private partnership entails a collaboration between the government, public, and the private sector, the private actor, working in consort, which is the model that Team Opposition contends is being sort of corrupted and misconstrued by Team Proposition. We contend that that challenge was to a large extent true and very much problematic in terms of the argumentation coming to us from Team Proposition. So Team Proposition's case, a lot of it sounds to us as though it is a lambasting of privatization, which this debate is not so much about. It's more about public-private partnership. Thank you. All right? Nevertheless, ladies and gentlemen, it was a scintillating match, and it's one of those moments that I personally will confess, it pains my heart that I can't advance both teams to the grand finals, because they're both deserving. Yes, absolutely. And so, ladies and gentlemen, with 271 points versus 290 points, the winner of this semi-final match in the public sector debate competition for 2025, the team that advances to the grand finals is the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining. Congratulations to Team Opposition. Indeed, you have done it. You have done it. And of course, a thunderous round of applause to the opposition team, to the proposition team, Team National Irrigation Commission, and a job very well done. Ladies and gentlemen, I understand we have a very special guest in our audience, the Executive Director of the Transformation Implementation Unit, Mrs. Maria Thompson Walters, is it? Yes. I invite her now to present the Best Debater Award. Listen, I call it a Best Debater. Yes. Because I think being a debater is a more powerful skill set than a public speaker, right? Yes. So I want to highlight the pride and joy that we have in this competition. Best Debater Award. And that award, listen, I want to just say to you, for the first time in this year's competition, I want to highlight a commendable debater and a best debater. Separated by 1 point, the two. The commendable debater in this match comes to us from the second place team. That is, ladies and gentlemen, for providing a blistering array of responses, challenging the argumentation of the opposition team. That debater, ladies and gentlemen, is the second speaker from Team Proposition. Overall, the best debater in this match, and to be presented with their prize by the Executive Director of TIU, is the second speaker on Team Opposition. Congratulations, sir. I wonder if his name was the name we hear bandied about. Is he Andre? Yes. I think he's Andre. Well, Andre, after all that abuse, you get a reward, right? And so, ladies and gentlemen, I know you agree wholeheartedly. You stand on the affirmative side, the proposition side, in relation to the statement that I am about to make, that this was a most enjoyable contest. Thank you very much for tuning in, for staying with us. And guess what? We have another semifinals match coming up. So listen, go and refresh yourself and breathe and have a conversation. But come back very soon, because the second semifinals match gets underway shortly. Thank you.